Hi everyone, I'm actually new to the BCS conference, so nice to meet you all. My name is Helen and I'm here to talk about the life of a transport cartography consultant, which might sound a bit dry, but it is thrilling. So a bit of background about me. My background is actually in GIS rather than cartography, but over the years I've become more, won't say obsessed or say interested in cartography. So I was brought on board to Steer, where GIS and cartography have in the past been sort of two more separate disciplines, and I was brought on board to sort of bring them closer together. So if you weren't here when Claire did her brilliant speech earlier about what Steer is, we're basically international consultancy working in cities, infrastructure and transport, and we're independent and employee owned, which is very nice. So just a quick note on why do people use consultants? Well, normally most of the work we do is project-based, so you're only working on something for maybe a couple of months. So a lot of local authorities or TfL or the DFT or all these organisations we work for don't actually have the budget or the need to employ anyone full-time. So enter us. Also, it can be quite good to have someone who is impartial and objective to the work that you're doing. So the work that I do is comes in two parts. Half of it is project work, which is the client-facing work, and I'll start by giving you some examples of that. And then the other part of it is the corporate work, so the internal-facing work that feeds into the project work. So what does project work look like? For me, it's actually more, mapping is normally part of a wider project. So the map is very rarely the actual output. It's part of someone else's report or their analysis. And as some of my colleagues say, I'm there to make their ideas look good and right, which I hope I do. So I actually think that project work is mostly about telling stories with maps and answering people's questions. So those questions can range from the really specific, such as, where am I? Or where is my site, to is my data correct? We do loads of modelling at our company, and sometimes it just comes in a massive Excel spreadsheet and you don't actually know if the results are right until you've put it into a map. And then the questions can range to being really exploratory. So what sorts of stories can data and maps tell about my area? Or how can I get people engaged and excited about my work? Because we all know maps is a great way to do that. Project work is actually a really, really iterative process, which can be very frustrating, but I think it's actually a really good thing. So outputs and analysis have to be signed off by lots of people, and you can see the diagram on the right. That's all the different types of people who have to sign off even just one map. And everyone in that diagram will have different ideas about what makes a good map, how they understand that map. So it gets critiqued by all those different people, which can be quite frustrating because obviously we're the cartographers, we're the experts, we think what we've done is a good job. But as we saw from the critiquing session we did at Better Mapping yesterday, if you were there for that, actually all individuals interpret maps slightly differently. And I think having lots of people take a look at what you've done helps you get to a really good sort of middle ground and sense of truth from your maps. So I'm just going to talk through, I think I've got 3, again, project examples. I think it's quite important to say that you might think of transport mapping in its traditional sense, the tube map or maps of where trains go, but actually what we do is much more about the movement of people. So not just where they're going and how they get there, but why they're going there. Why aren't they going there? Are there barriers or restrictions that mean people don't want to go to those places? So it's not just about mapping necessarily transport infrastructure, it's much more people-focused, what we do. So the first project I'm going to go through is the Barnet Long-Term Transport Strategy Evidence Base. So if you don't know, Barnet is a London borough just to the north of London. So the objectives of this work were to prepare a long-term, up to 2041, transport strategy for the London Borough of Barnet to be underpinned by an evidence base, which they wanted to be very sort of graphic and map-focused and very engaging. So the key question about this was, what stories can mapping reveal about Barnet, which is very vague. That's a very vague brief to get. And I think it was slightly informed by the fact that my project manager was going on holiday for 3 weeks, so just sort of said, do what you can about Barnet. So my approach was to produce a mapping suite that helped reveal the story of movement in Barnet. I think in total there were about 35 maps of Barnet. I complemented this with a statistics report, so this had key highlights that I found from the data as I was going through it. So often I have people coming up to me asking, what's the population there, or what's the pollution level there? And only I can give them that information because they can't access the GIS software. So I think it's really useful to, as you go along, just pull out bits of information that people can use in their report without having to keep coming up to you every 10 minutes, because that can get annoying for you as well. So this is the base map concept that I did for the area of Barnet. It's quite a sort of standard topographic map. It's, as with a lot of transport maps, it's very transport focused. So the roads and the rail network are really, especially the underground network, are really the key features. So the challenges of Barnet are, it's quite an interesting area because it's right on the edge of London. So the north of the district is really rural. You can see there's a huge open space between Woodside Park and Mill Hill Broadway. So it's really difficult to not let that big open space dominate the area and dominate the mapping. That also means that the population density hugely varies from the north of the site to the south of the site. And as you know, working with things like census geographies, the sizes are all worked out by population density. So you'll end up with very big zones at the top of the area and very small zones at the south of the area, making those areas dominate. It's also a London fringe area, so that means there's something called a data cliff. I don't know if that's a word I've just made up, but I think it sounds quite good, whereby there's a lot of data sets that exist just for London. So you could map lots of data here, but just to the north of the site in Hertfordshire, you just completely lose all of that and you lose some of the context. But as with most consultancy work, the main constraint and challenge is the budget. So there was only, I think, probably too small a budget to do this work, so we had to make the mapping and the AI files, because this is all done in Illustrator, very versatile, so we didn't have to make too many documents. So it had to be suitable for presentations and reports, and also the base map had to be able to interact with over 30 different data sets, all of very different geographies. So this is another version of the base map. What I wanted to do was make the AI file really, really adaptive. So I had what I call key switchables, so you can see the road layer changes from being very bright and the main focus to being much more subtle, and the same thing with green space and district boundaries. So this means that they become much less the star of the maps, and the data that you can overlay with them is the thing that you start to look at more, and the base map is just there if you need that context. So I'm just going to go through a few of the maps that we made for this project. So this is, I think some people were showing yesterday some air quality maps of London. This data is just fantastic. It's one of my favourite to work with. This is NO2 concentration across London. So, and what I've done here, as I mentioned, is I've just pulled out areas where it's really high. So that's around, I think, Mill Hill Broadway. Brent Cross, so that the people writing the actual Word document can have that information to hand without having to just interpret that whole raster data set. And then something else that we look at for loads of our projects is the census travel to work data, which is fantastic data, even if it does occasionally contain people saying they walk from Aberdeen to London every day to work. But it's really good data because it says where you live, where you work, and how you get there. So this is showing where people who live in Barnet, where they're working. So you can see a lot of them work in Barnet and live in Barnet, but there's also a lot of people in central London, as you'd probably expect. And it's really important to have this overlay with the transport network, because then we can start to assume how they're getting around. Because the key thing in transport consultancy is there's never the exact data set you want. There's always a few things that can help you get to the answer, but it's never just a data set of where people are going exactly. And then, as I mentioned, mapping is very rarely the actual output. So for this, the actual main output was a transport strategy, sort of nice graphic report, and you can see how the mapping fits in with that. So the next project I'm going to speak about is the Stansted Airport Wayfinding Signage Audit. I don't know if any of you have been to Stansted and driven around Stansted, but it is incredibly easy to get lost there. So that's why we did this work. So the objective was to gain an understanding of the quantity, type, condition, and locations of signage around the Stansted Airport campus. This was to help them understand where these were and to give them greater control over the system and therefore improve user experiences. So the key questions for this were, where are my assets? Why are people getting lost? And how can we help them to stop getting lost? And I've got an example of one of the signs here, please go to zone blank. This is the type of thing that people are having to deal with. So our approach to this was we used a mobile application to record locations, attributes, and imagery of sites. This connected straight to a live web-hosted database, which streams into a live web map. So basically, as we were going around logging locations of the signs, this was coming straight onto our web database and streaming straight onto a web map that our client could see straight away. So the outcomes, we surveyed over 1,500 signs. That was over about 10 days, I think, on each day. That was about 20,000 steps, which would have been a great workout if I hadn't had a McDonald's on the train every day home. So those are a couple of the signs you can see. You can see why it's so confusing for people. You've got all that different information on the signs. You've got really confusing different coloured car parks, different names for car parks, signs half sort of taped up. So it was a really necessary piece of work. And then this is the final sort of cartographic output, and I think the key thing here to talk about is the base map. So the base map is based on OpenStreetMap data, and it streams live I think it updates every 15 minutes, which is great because it means we never have to worry about updating it. But what we've done is OpenStreetMap data, as you all know, has so much information in it, but we really wanted to slim it down and make it really focused to what people were looking for on this, which we thought was obviously road infrastructure because it's for people getting around by road, but also airport infrastructure because the people using this would be working at the airports. So that was what we've done, and I think it works pretty well. And then the final map is, or the final project I'm going to talk about, is the Transport for the Southeast Economic Connectivity Review. I love this map because I think it looks like someone's just taken a watercolour paintbrush and just drawn it down the English Channel. I just think it looks really nice. But that's not the maps that we were supposed to use. So the objectives of this project was an economic study of the Southeast, which is the area basically south of London and east of Southampton. So a key thing was, it was basically transport economists doing the bulk of the work for this project. And they were identifying corridors and clusters in the southeast that were key to transport and identifying connectivity issues and improvements. So they were basically doing the bulk of the work and then came to us and said, how can we best visualize this? How can we communicate it? Because it was something that needed to go to the public, so everyone needed to be able to understand it. The added task that got thrown in was one of our directors came up with this Mapspiration, which I don't know, again, is a word I've just made up, or if it actually exists, which is a 1942 map called Great Britain and Her Natural and Industrial Resources, which is gorgeous, and he saw it in the Transport Times or one of those other many transport magazines get thrown around our office, and really wanted us to be inspired by it. So my colleague Claire, who you also was presenting earlier, put together this base map, which I think is just great. So it's inspired by that map you just saw, but it's much more sort of modern, fresher feel, much more sort of open and less expert looking, and just a bit more fun. We think it really speaks to the natural and nautical character of the region. It's very outward looking, so it's not just based on the southeast itself. You can see the interconnectivities with the regional areas. And a really difficult thing when you're mapping areas in the UK is to make it not London focused, especially when so much infrastructure is clustered in London. It's really difficult to make everything else look like that's the focus, and I think this does that really well. So as well as the project work, I mentioned earlier that I do a lot of corporate work. So that can be training and quality control for mapping across the whole company. So in our company, I think we have 400 staff at the moment, about 400 staff, and on our GIS user group list we have 150 people, which means over a quarter of our staff are using GIS, so that's a lot of people to get trained up to the same standard and to get their work quality controlled. So that takes up quite a lot of time. We're also responsible for our Centralized GIS database. So this is where we keep all of our sort of Ordnance Survey data, Natural England data, any data that we use across lots of projects. For the UK alone, this is over 350 active data sets, but as Claire mentioned earlier, we have offices across 4 continents and we work basically anywhere. Although we've never yet worked in Antarctica, which is really annoying. Not much transport. And apart from that, we do a lot of mapping and promotion and outreach. So like we're here today, we do a lot of these sorts of events internally as well. We do a GIS quiz, which is everyone obviously loves. We do a lot of building GIS tools, so to help things be more streamlined for the people who aren't so much experts in GIS and cartography, and also a lot of research and innovation work, which is always really interesting. So just going to finish with some thoughts on consultancy life. So a typical week for me is, as I said, about 80% project work and about 20% corporate work. I've gone into these projects in massive detail, and or not in massive detail, but these are the projects that I've spent a lot of time on. But actually, I only work probably on an average project, about 4 hours. That's because quite often people will say, oh, I just need to know about population density, or I just want a site location plan. And you really have to be constrained to that, because you might have the best ideas for something you could do on a project and think of the most beautiful map you can do. But if you've only budgeted 4 hours for it, if you do more than that, then the company starts to lose money. So that's part of consultancy life. So with that in mind, I actually probably work on about 15 to 20 projects every week. So it's a lot of juggling, and then about 3 proposals, which is where we're bidding for work. So yeah, as I was saying, you're limited to the hours budgeted for your work at the start of the project. I just want to say, while I'm here, the gentleman from the government earlier was saying about how he was looking at mapping where people are teaching, teacher training, and where their jobs are. And by coincidence, these maps, even though the PDF bar at the bottom is slightly covering them, the maps at the bottom show the difference in density of higher education providers and apprentices. I can't remember exactly for what industry, but I think those density maps are quite a nice way of comparing the two. So yeah, my job isn't just maps. So across a typical week, this is all the different software that I use, and by far and away, I use Excel more than anything. I mean, I probably have about 4 different Excel windows open at any time. Normally, at least 2 are crashed. So it's just cleaning out data, finding coordinates is a really big one. I was working on a project recently where I was given the locations of 8,000 different housing developments, and I had to map them. The locations ranged from postcodes to coordinates to area west of Haywards Heath, which is half the country. So that's what you spend most of your time doing, cleaning up data and making it meaningful. But I also work across all these different types of software, from the ones you've probably heard of, like ArcMap and Illustrator, through to things that are a bit more obscure, like DepthMap, which is a way of measuring connectivity, which is my favourite piece of software at the moment. So yeah, mapping isn't all we do as cartography. Most of it is background work before you can even open up your mapping software. So to conclude, here are some pros and cons to consultancy life. So pros, you need a variety of skills, including non-technical. So one of the things I love most about my job, and I'm sure you all do as well, is that when you're doing mapping, you have to be really numerate and you have to be good at geography, but you also get to be really creative, and you get to use so many different skills. And I just love that, because it's just using all parts of your brain and you just can never get bored. The breadth of projects, so no 2 projects we do are the same. They're always in really interesting locations. I love 1 second I'm doing a map of the whole world, the next I'm doing a map of one street in North London. I just really, as a geographer, that's just really exciting. And I also get to, in a way, travel to places that I'll never get to go to because I'm making a map of them, or that's how I like to think of it. You get to meet lots of people with different expertise. You get to do lots of mentoring and training, which I love. I love watching people develop their skills and become better and hopefully become more excited and interested in our work. Research, innovation, and the freedom to learn and develop. So one of the great things about where we work is we're really given the freedom to do this. There's very little red tape. We can sort of, if we're interested in an area, we can just go and find out about it, as long as we're still doing our project work. And also you get to do international and really localised work, as I mentioned earlier. But there are cons. I think the biggest con is what we call Friday afternoon panic maps, which is where everyone at 2:30 realises their deadline's at 5:30 and they haven't asked you for a map. So Friday afternoons are actually my least favourite time of the week, but they're supposed to be your favourite, but they're my least favourite. This is another big one, can you just requests? And I think one of my colleagues in Leeds has this up as a poster next to his computer. This is where people who don't really have much technical knowledge about the subject come up to you and say, can you just do this? It will just take you like 15 minutes, won't it? And it's like, that's 2 days of work. So that's always a bit of a pain. Lack of exposure and credit. So this is quite annoying. It's how you can spend ages doing a map and then it goes in a document that it says that someone else has done it. Or I had a map on BBC News once and it said it was by the client. And that's fine, because that's how consultancy works. We're doing our work for the client, but sometimes you kind of want to put your name on it, but you can't. Confidentiality, this is a really big one. So I think the most interesting and beautiful work we do is our confidential projects. And I've got some really good ones that I'd love to come up and talk to you about, but I'm not allowed, so just trust me that they're happening and they're great. And then this is sort of the flip side of the variety of skills you have. So it can be really difficult to develop expertise across so many different skills. So if you look at any job description in GIS or cartography at the moment, you need to be really good at ARC, you need to be good at Q. It'd be great if you could do some JavaScript, if you could do some Python, if you can use some Illustrator. I saw a job advert recently that was for a GIS analyst and office administrator. And it's just like, how can I be all these things? It's really difficult to become a specialist or to become an expert in all these things when you're at the same time trying to become an expert in all the other things, and it's just really difficult. But to weigh up, I love being a GIS and cartography consultant. It's just so much fun. But I'm a millennial, so I have to conclude on a meme. It's the rules. Oh no, the thing's covering it. Okay, so I can just talk. So this is what my friends think I do, which is colouring in. This is what my parents think I do, which is sort of 18th century naval navigation, which I don't. This is what society thinks I do, which is standing out in the rain wearing a high-vis with a GPS. I have done that. I'm sure a lot of people in this room have also done that. This is what my colleagues think I do, which is sort of reprographics and printing, which wasn't a module in my master's, but apparently I'm an expert in printing anything they want. And this is what I really do, which is just watching loads of programs crashing at the same time. When I was putting the slide together, I was getting such anxiety, and I can't look at it for very long, so let's just conclude. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening, and if you want to get in touch with me, please do. I love to chat maps, so do get in touch. Thank you.
Okay, we do have time for any questions of Helen, if anyone wants to ask. I, of course, have one in reserve. David?
One of your slides had a map of natural jenks. I just wondered what a jenk was.
A jenk is when you... I would never know if they're called natural jenks or natural jerks. I thought it was jenks. When you're classifying your data, it groups it into... Are you about to tell me?
Jenks was a very well-known American academic cartographer from the late 50s, who developed this method of trying to equalise classes in a corporate.
So it is jenks.
So it's jenks.
So it is jenks, not jerks. Oh, sorry, I can use this still. So it's a way of classifying your data. So when you're dividing, when you've got quantitative data and you want to put it in certain bands, say 1 to 10, 10 to 20, natural jenks clusters it into ways that it's sort of naturally forming. It's supposed to be quite a good way of being objectively classifying the data whilst giving it a sort of interesting structure based on it. Does that make sense?
It's a
Great.
classification used in ArcGIS.
It's the best one.
Any other questions?
Sometimes.
If not, can we say, once again, thank you to